to the Athlete Profile Show with me, Chris Stafford. My guest today is Canadian judo player Jessica Klimkait. Jess grew up in Whitby, Ontario, and followed in her brother Justin's footsteps when she began to learn judo at the age of 4 at the Ajax Budokan Judo Club in nearby Ajax. Her former coach of 13 years was the club's chief instructor, Kevin Doherty, a two-time Olympian. But at the age of 19, Jess moved to the Canadian Team Training Centre in Montreal. She's been on the team since 2014 and competed at the 2015 Youth Olympic Games in Nanjing, China, where she finished 5th in the 63-kilogram division. In the same year, Jess competed in the first IJF World Tour event at the Zagreb Grand Prix before taking part at her first 2 IJF Junior World Championships. She established herself in the senior ranks in 2017 by winning gold at the Pan American Championships before earning her first Grand Slam podium when claiming bronze in Ekaterinburg. Jess became the second Canadian to win a world title in judo at the 2021 IJF World Championships in Budapest. In her Olympic debut at Tokyo in 2020, Jess won the bronze medal in the 57-kilogram category, becoming the first Canadian woman to win an Olympic medal in judo. Jess is passionate about encouraging girls to take up combat sports, which she's found develops confidence and a body-positive attitude. Jess also shares with us her ideas of how we can reduce the dropout rate for teenage girls in sport. Jess, hi, welcome to the program.
Hey, how are you? Thanks for having me. I'm good.
Well, it's good to catch up with you because obviously I heard about what you did at the Olympics last year, coming back with a bronze medal. Congratulations for that, because you also had a pretty good year lead up to that, winning the World Championships too. So double congrats.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it was quite the couple of months for me in the summer.
And now you've got all sights set on Paris, no doubt. It's going to be just a couple of years away. It's going to come around very quickly, isn't it?
Yes, it's quite different. You know, we're used to the 4-year cycle, so having it condensed into 2 is definitely a bit of a toll on planning and developing certain things in my training. But I still feel really motivated and confident to get where I need to be by that time. So it's going to crunch your year this year, will it, as well as next year in terms of scheduling, qualifications particularly, Jess, because they obviously determine your journey to the next Olympics. Yeah, absolutely. For judo, qualifications actually start this May. So it's a really quick turnaround. We didn't even have really a year off, before thinking about the next Olympic cycle. So, but it's just about, showing up to each competition, feeling good and prepared and ready rather than feeling rushed. I don't want this just because it's 2 years to start, rushing into things and doing things too impulsively. I still want to try to keep things slow and, grow my judo in a natural way rather than forcing anything.
Well, it's obviously something that's in your blood now, right? Because you started at a very young age, I understand, with your brother on the mat when you were barely running, were you? Very young. What was the appeal for you at that young age, Jess?
At that age, I had so much energy. If there's anything my parents would tell you, it's just that I was running around. Even as a baby, I was kicking my legs nonstop. So they started my brother in the sport when he was around, I think, 5. And I was just on the side of the mat and I started mimicking everything that, he was doing and everything that I was seeing. So they thought, you know what, might as well throw her in as well. And I really took to it. It was a really good thing that took all of my focus. It was mental, it was physical, it was creative. So I just took to it really, really well.
And was there some sibling rivalry there too with Justin?
Absolutely. At one point, we weren't allowed to fight each other in the club because things would just get a little too heated. There was definitely some sibling rivalry, but as we got older and more mature, it kind of got away from that. But yeah, we went through our years of fighting.
Now, you grew up in Whitby, wasn't it, next to Ajax, and you were with the Ajax Budokan Judo Club for much of your childhood, right, and young adulthood before you moved to the Canadian team training centre there in Montreal. Did you get assigned a coach or a chief instructor when you were in that club and stick with them? How did it work, Jess, when you were learning the game?
Yeah. So at my club, Ajax Budokan Judo Club, it was ran by a family that goes by the Dohertys. That's their last name. And Kevin Doherty was the main instructor there. He was a previous Olympian and a previous world medalist as well. So he really knew exactly, what it took to become something in this sport. And he definitely portrayed that in his training. So I was getting really good, high quality training from a young age. And I stayed there until I was about 18 or 19. And then I had to move from the provincial training center over to the National Training Center here in Montreal.
What did you think then during those formative years were the skills that you naturally had that you were bringing to the sport? What was it that really made you stand out, do you think, Jess? What are the natural gifts that you have? Yeah,
I think it's interesting because now I'm fairly established in my style and my techniques. But even when I look back at old fights of me at, 10, 11, 12, 13 years old, I definitely had, a style that was quicker, that was faster, that was very, very offensive for my age. And that can be a little bit different. You often see players, they kind of teeter between, sometimes they're offensive, sometimes they're really defensive, but I just always went into every match with a lot of energy, always offensive. So that, nurturing that along the years really brought me to this point where I am now in my career. And that's really my established style. I really like to be offensive and always look for the score rather than sort of play, sometimes tactically or defensive. So, yeah.
Obviously, your brother was into the sport, but what about your parents, Rob and Kathy? Were they into sports? Did they play judo?
Yeah, so my dad, why we chose judo was because my dad used to do it as a teenager. He started doing it at one of the early judo clubs in Toronto, and he also really liked the sport. But at the time, there wasn't much infrastructure for youth in judo. That we're talking about like the 1970s, 1980s. But when he had kids and he was looking for a sport to put them in, judo just sort of seemed like the obvious choice for him.
Awesome. How about your mom? Did you ever get her on the mat?
No. She's not one to jump on the mats. She's definitely supportive from the sidelines, though.
Well, clearly they're very supportive of your career. And now, what do they think of it now? Because obviously they invested so much in you, and you went all the way with this sport. How do they regard you as an athlete now? Because I think obviously parents are always very proud. Did they expect you to go all the way? Do you think?
I think if you were to, from the outside looking in, maybe a lot of it made sense. I was talented when I was young. I was very motivated and I was very determined, but there were definitely a few times more so in my teenage years where, things maybe seemed a little bit unclear. I went through a time of being unsure if I wanted to, pursue sport as my career, especially when I had a lot of friends, going the university route and looking for more of like a normal lifestyle. So, once I got over those sort of hurdles, I think it did become clear that I was very devoted to making this work for me. So, yeah.
Did you do any other sports, Jess?
No. It was always judo. And yeah. Another thing to add, I know that, a lot of parents have a hard time knowing how to motivate their kids, but my parents just sort of left the doorway open for me. They let me sort of naturally become motivated and fall in love with the sport. And they never, pushed me to go or pushed me to go train. It all just was very natural for me.
Well, what about the opportunities for young girls through your childhood and into youth? Did you see as many women or girls playing the sport as you would like, or has that grown over the course of your career? What does that look like for young women?
Yeah, so definitely when I was younger, there were not as many girls on the mat. It's definitely more of like a male dominated kind of sport. I did have a lot of, girls come in and out of, the club, and that was great to see. But primarily I was always around boys, and I was always training with boys. And in one sense that was great because I was, maybe training a little more advancedly compared to the other girls just because I was training with the boys. But definitely there's a lot to say about women support and being able to look up and see, a girl, an older girl doing what you want to be doing. So that's why it's really important for me to have done what I have done for Canada and for judo in Canada, because I really want the younger girls to see that it's possible to pursue a martial arts in Canada and still be successful. So
do you think there were equal opportunities then, Jess, equal access for girls, and but they had to get to know the sport to realize those opportunities? What do you think that climate was like, and how has it changed now, do you think, for girls? And essentially in contact sports, not just judo, because you've probably watched this in other sports too.
When I was younger, there was still a bit more, it was more of a taboo thing to have a girl in martial arts or combat sports, but you can see just over the past, 5-10 years, Ronda Rousey is someone that comes to mind. She was, an ex-judo player and Olympian as well. And she completely, opened the doors for women in UFC. So we're starting to see this turn, for females in combat sports. And I think that's amazing because, I know personally what it's brought to me as a girl, and in terms of self-confidence and things like that. So I just hope that it continues to flourish and have more exposure for girls to see.
Well, you can imagine, as for young girls, as you know, coming through your late teens into your early 20s, and it's so important for young girls to, feel confident, right? To keep them in the sport, to give them confidence, to empower them, to make them feel good about their bodies too. Jess, you must have watched this with girls who, some maybe not as confident as you, maybe some were disillusioned because they didn't feel, an inner strength and composure and a confidence about their body and their capabilities too. Because you often see young girls drift out of the sport because they just can't, if you like, get into that mindset that this is going to empower them. This is going to be good for them in other walks of life, right? Beyond sport. Yeah.
I think there's a couple of, things I could say about that. I definitely did reach a point when I was in my early teenage years, and I knew that working out twice a day and doing weight training and, getting stronger was going to physically make me look a lot stronger and different than the other girls my age. And I remember at times, wanting to skimp out on my training just so I wouldn't, develop, an overly strong body. But it started to take a turn when I realized that, my body and like the way that I look is a representation of how much work that I've put into the sport and my commitments. And that's something that's actually really respectable. And I try to use that as something that gives me confidence. And it sometimes it teeters and sometimes it's hard, but I know that the stronger I am, the more I'm able to compete and the better my results will be. So, there's definitely, things to say about that. And just in terms of self-confidence, for girls, and to being able to use your body in a sport and feel strong and feel like you're accomplishing something is also a whole other thing, and a whole other, turning point in terms of starting to feel confident about yourself and your body.
What kind of conversations did you hear, if you like, in the locker room, Jess, amongst young girls, your contemporaries when you were growing up? That their attitude towards the sport, their self-belief, if you will, in the sport?
Definitely, there was a lot of wavering confidence. Definitely girls not seeing the value in their athleticism, and a lot of girls probably coming to a conclusion too quickly about their abilities. There's different timelines for everyone in sport, and some girls accomplish things a lot sooner than others. So I would see girls that would have tremendous capabilities, but sort of just, decide to cut things off early because, they didn't quite see the success that they wanted to see at that point. And it's hard to have and show young athletes that they have their own roadmap, and if they're not seeing what they want in the short term, it doesn't mean that it's not capable in the long term. So, yeah.
And in terms of the dropout rates amongst young girls, we see this through middle school, particularly those years, and in high school. What do you see from your perspective in judo is the reason for that then, Jess? What are you hearing?
As I kind of already mentioned, when I was around 16 or 17, I almost debated stopping the sport altogether. I told my parents, I told my coaches, and obviously my coaches were pretty shocked at the time because I was fairly successful. So they didn't quite see the reason why, but I had friends talking about a normal lifestyle, them moving out to go to university and, spending the weekends how they choose. And for me, I was, getting up at 6 a.m. every day and training twice a day for 4 or 5 hours. And then, traveling for maybe 3 or 4 months out of the year. So I started to question if, I maybe just wanted a normal life, and that seemed more desirable at the time. But, my coaches sort of explained to me that a normal life awaits me, no matter when I stop judo, and what I'm doing with mine is something that not everyone gets to do. And if you've been handed certain tools and capabilities in your life, it would be a shame to not at least pursue that the best that I can to see my potential.
So what was the turning point, Jess? Where were you when you decided, you know what, I'm going to stick at this and I am going to aim at the Olympic Games? Because that is a milestone in any athlete's career, isn't it? When they have that realization. At what point were you in your career when that bell rang?
I think for me, after that conversation with my coaches, we did alleviate some of the training, and I was able to sort of, do, some of the activities that I wanted to do. But I think, so that definitely helped. But the biggest thing for me was going to the Youth Olympics. I went in 2015 to Nanjing, and it was an incredible experience. And I just thought, if I can actually go to the real Olympics, like, this is truly what I want to experience on a larger scale. And from that moment, I unwaveringly decided that, I was going to pursue this.
And the dedication really took root, did it? To the discipline, to do the training, just put in the hard yards. That's when it really, the switch flipped, did it, at that point?
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, you had a lot of success there too. Now that is obviously encouragement. It empowers you. It gives you confidence, but it also made you hungry.
Yeah, definitely. The success was maybe not, it was something that gave me validation to prove to me that, what I'm doing in training is right and I am progressing. But it was more so the failures and the bumps and the roadblocks along the way that kept urging me to do better and better. It would just, every time I didn't quite get to where I wanted to be, it would just sort of eat away at me. And the only thing that would make me feel better about that failure was to just get back to the mats and keep working really hard. And if I achieve something the next time, then it was sort of just, okay, that's validation, but it's on to the next. So that's just sort of, how my mind's been working for the last 4 or 5 years in terms of, these larger competitions.
So what would you say to your young self now with the experience and knowledge that you have and how your career has evolved?
Oh boy. I would definitely tell her that, I have time. There's lots of time to do, what I want to do. I remember, going to competitions when I was younger and I, wouldn't succeed to the level that I wanted. I would miss the podium, or my first time in Europe, I would lose my first fight of the competition. And, you definitely go through questioning, when am I going to get there? When is the hard work going to pay off? And you start to feel like you're losing time to get better. But, I definitely had a lot of time, and, I didn't need to stress, I guess.
Now, I know you want to get more girls into combat sports. So what's your message to them, Jess, now? What would you say would you with your experience now and your knowledge, and you've walked the walk, what will it take for them to just pause and think, okay, maybe I don't want to leave the sport, maybe I do want to get into judo, maybe there's another way to do this, and to gain the benefits that you can out of judo, Jess, because as we said earlier, there's so much there that it offers beyond the mat. Yeah.
Well, I would definitely say, there's nothing that's made me feel more confident in my life than, doing this sport. And even if it's just training by training and getting stronger and stronger, definitely has taught me a lot about, my self-worth and my self-confidence. But on the other hand, I've created such good relationships with my training partners and with my coaches. And I've been exposed to so many different experiences around the world that I would have really lost out on. So, it would have been a shame if at, 15 or 16, I decided to turn the other way, because I really would have lost out on developing myself into, my best self, I guess you could say.
So what do you most value then out of being a professional athlete, Jess?
I guess I would say that I value sort of what it brings out in me. You definitely don't know how much you're capable of until your limits are tested, and that's in terms of mentally and physically and emotionally. And it definitely pushes you to grow every single day in ways that maybe you didn't even know were possible. So to be able to continue to do this for the next few years and to see how much more I can grow in those ways is something that, keeps me intrigued and engaged and motivated.
Well, you've made history already with the bronze medal as a Canadian woman, and obviously the gold is your big goal, isn't it, for Paris? So wouldn't that be lovely to make it go the next level, the next 2 levels, and come back with a gold. So what does that look like in terms of training now? Because we said, well, obviously Paris just been a couple of years away. Your schedule's looking much more condensed now. I understand you're still going to Tel Aviv for the Grand Slam there on the 17th of February. Is that your next competition?
So originally that was the plan, but we decided to push back, and I'll be competing at the end of March. At the beginning of the year, there was some sort of, realities about COVID, and our training center shut down for a week. So it just makes more sense to push my first competition back. But yeah, in terms of the next 2 years, definitely it is a condensed cycle, between the 2 Olympics, but I still feel very young in my career, and I still feel like I have so many more areas to grow and become better. And in one way, it can be daunting that there's only 2 years to do that, but in another way, 4 years is also just as daunting. 4 years is a very long road. So there's pros and cons to all. And it's just about making sure that I'm doing what I need to do every single day, and I'm reaching my goals, and I'm constantly changing and adapting to certain competitions or whatever happens, and things like that. Yeah.
So where is the first fight then for you, and what are the big competitions for the rest of this year, Jess?
Yeah, so the first one will be in Georgia, and that is at the end of March. And I plan to do at least maybe 2 or 3 more competitions until the World Championships, which will be held in October, and those will be in Uzbekistan.
Okay, so which Georgia are we talking about? Georgia in the US?
Not in the United States. No.
I didn't think it was. Right, the other Georgia, right near Uzbekistan, right?
Exactly.
You've been over there a few times in that direction, haven't you? So, what does a typical day look like for you then now in terms of training? Because I've caught you in between training sessions. Mm-hmm. How many hours would you spend typically in a week, and how many days in a week are you training?
Day by day, it's about 4 to 5 hours. I'm doing around 2 hours in the morning and around 2 hours at night. In the mornings, we're either doing technical training or weight training in the gym. And then every evening we're on the mats, and we're doing sparring and drills and conditioning, on the mats. So throughout a week, I would say it's on average 25 hours, I think.
And cross training?
Yeah. Well, not in terms of, doing another sport completely, but we do a lot of circuit training where it doesn't necessarily involve, judo movements, and we're not on the mats. It's sort of, we're using machinery that can kind of, utilize the same muscle groups, but it's not judo.
Do you do weights?
I do weights, yes. At least 2 or 3 times a week, I'm doing weight training in the gym.
For any athlete, the nutrition is really important. Talk about your personal preferences. Are you very disciplined about it?
Being in a weight class sport, I don't really have the choice there. So I do have to, lose weight before competitions and sort of always keep that in mind. So it's really helped me actually sort of learn about, optimizing my nutrition and learning about, the kinds of foods that I'm eating that are going to make me feel best during training, even if I sort of have to watch my weight or lose weight or anything like that. So
what would your advice be then for young girls who, they've got to learn these kind of disciplines, right? To be disciplined because it's a weight-based sport. What would you say to them?
It definitely comes with a lot of learning curves. I think, exposure to, knowledge about nutrition and having the right resources or like a nutritionist would be really, really important. Otherwise, when I was younger, I was just sort of like in the dark and guessing and definitely losing weight in not the healthiest of ways. And once I started to see a nutritionist and be exposed to things like that, I started to view food more as something like fuel and something that can aid and help me. And it's not, something that's working against me in terms of like putting on weight or things like that, which I think when you're younger, you just don't understand those things. And you can make some like pretty wrong decisions when it comes to, food and how much you're eating and things like that.
Yeah, well, I asked simply because, with young women, they're very conscious of their body and afraid to put on weight. And, when you're a professional athlete, this all factors in, obviously, to your performance and certainly in a weight-based sport such as judoka.
For sure.
So, yeah, is there any other message that you would like to give to young girls? Jess, is there anything else you'd like to add?
I think there's not really anything specific. We definitely touched on a lot of different subjects. I think it would just, if there was anything, it would just be encouraging them to stay in sport. I think, you'll be very surprised of, the things you'll learn about yourself and the experiences that you'll have if you just, stay in it and pursue it. So
go find a local judo club then and have a go, right?
For sure. Have a go. Exactly.
And in the meantime, they can follow you on social media and gain obviously inspiration from you and motivation. Where would they find you, Jess?
I'm primarily on Instagram, and that's just my full name. It's just Jessica Klimkait. Yeah.
Right. And they can send you any questions, right? We're not
for sure.
We're not setting you up here for,
No.
Okay. Awesome.
It's open.
It's all open. DMs are open. So slide into the DMs and follow Jess all the way to Paris, hopefully, where she's going to bring back a gold medal next time. Just get very selective. Yeah. Only the gold is good enough. Awesome. Well, thanks for taking time to come on the show. It's lovely to talk to you. And, the very best of luck all the way to Paris. We'll be following you now.
Thank you so much. That was a really lovely conversation. I'm really happy with everything we talked about and touched on. So thank you for having me.
You bet. All right. Good luck with the training, Jess.
Thanks so much.
And if you visit our website at whistsports.com, you'll find links to Jess's social media in the show notes accompanying this episode. Do check out some of the other shows we have here at Whist Sports. There is something for everyone when it comes to the world of women's sports. And if you have a moment whilst you're on your podcast app, do drop us a review or a rating, which always helps others to find us here at Wisp Sports. And if you have any comments, questions, or suggestions, you can always leave them on our social media channels at Wisp Sports, or you can drop us a line to info@wispsports.com. Until the next time, thank you for listening. Goodbye for now.